Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. And we have got a real treasure for you today. We have Jack Devine, who is a 32-year member, a veteran of the CIA, famously helped capture Pablo Escobar, tracked him down. That's kind of interesting. Might want to hear a little bit more about that. And author of the new book, Spy Master's Prism, The Fight Against Russian Aggression. And welcome to the show, Jack. Glad to have you on.
Dan, it's great to be on with you. I loved your introduction by that music and all set the pace. I'm really informed now. I feel like I'm coming right off an espionage operation. So
that's what it does. We thought kind of like that. Yeah, we perfect for your segment today. That's right. Actually, tell us a little bit about that book that you have there coming out. What's the gist of it? And just tell me a little bit about it.
Well, the paperback's coming out. It actually came out the 1st of November, readily available. I wrote the book right before, about a year before the Russians invaded Ukraine. And it was all about the threat that Putin presented, what made Putin tick, a number of Soviet operations and how they did things. And I basically said Ukraine was going to be the next, or Kyiv was going to be the next Berlin, and Putin was going to underestimate and be surprised about what he was going to find if he did try and invade. So I thought I was prescient. The problem is, for the audience, anybody that wants to write a book, don't be too far ahead of your time, because my friends in the government and elsewhere said, Jack, why are you writing a book about Russia? It's all about China. I said, look, it's never all about any place, because you wake up one morning and all of a sudden it's turned upside down. And that happened again, not only in Ukraine, but when you look at just October 7th, out of the blue, people were sleeping on Hamas. The next thing you know, the world's turned in turmoil. So the intelligence world, you have to have a flag planted everywhere. This was a call to arms, figuratively, against the Russian aggression of Putin. Putin is a menace. And again, I have a chapter in there that I would have changed the title. I said Spy Master President. And I actually gave him too much credit as a spy master and, cool, calm, collected. I really think he's a mafia don. That what I've seen is his behavior, his thought process is more attuned to, the fictionalized side.
And I'm sorry, when did that book first come out?
19. No, excuse me. It came out in 20. And the paperback came out this year.
Oh, so even before the big buildup started in 21.
I was about a year or year and a half ahead of the invasion.
That's pretty impressive.
But the problem with it, Dan, is my kids and relatives read it, but I'm not sure. Well, I know my colleagues didn't want to read it because it was about Russia. They said, "Oh, why are we wasting our time?" And in the book, I point out we were
that's old stuff.
we had reduced our intelligence investment in watching the Russians, and we were complacent about it. It was somehow manageable. National leaders felt that they could handle Putin. And again, I think, this is not a guy that, you're going to deal with it in a diplomatic sense. It's, you're not sitting down with a mafia guy. You have to think about that's how you deal with them. And I was disappointed that some people didn't really pick up on that the way I would have hoped. And now there shouldn't be any reason for anybody to doubt. I'm worried about wobbly knees. I've written a couple op-eds. I'm not a regular writer for the Wall Street Journal, but I've been in 3 times, which is a lot for someone like me, because I'm not writing regular articles, but I get upset once in a while. So when Putin invaded the week after, I said that he just sowed the seeds of his own demise, which I think is true. And then about in May, I think I wrote saying, this is bigger than Ukraine. You're getting wobbly knees out there. And this is really about the struggle between the Russians, the Chinese, and Iranians, little footnote on North Korea, and the U.S., NATO, and its allies. I mean, we're really, and the Hamas thing is dividing the line even harder. If you walk away, you might feel self-satisfied for a little bit, but you're going to come back, and you're going to pay, it's going to be hell to be paid. And people have lost a sense of history. So that was my message. and I'm only half kidding. I mean, I probably would have sold a lot more books if I published it the week or two beforehand. But I think
Yeah.
that's right about sizing Putin. But it isn't just Putin. It's Xi, it's Ayatollah. There's an alliance that's clear, and now they are trying to mobilize. It's so familiar to the Cold War. We're fighting. They're fighting. You have the Wagner Group all through Africa.
Yeah.
They're bussing around in Latin America. They're trying to extend their power, and we need to push back appropriately.
Yeah, and that I wish we had like a full hour here, because I'd almost like to shift gears and just talk about the ahead of the curve for the China issue, especially when Xi Jinping was just here. But we are definitely want to have you back on the show specifically to talk about that. But I want to shift gears a little bit now to something else you had recently in the Wall Street Journal, where you're talking about the intelligence failures on October 7th in Israel regarding the Hamas thing. And to set the stage for our readers here, I want to show you just a real big quick clip from NBC News.
This morning, there's a lot of finger pointing in the Israeli intelligence service. Saturday's attack will go down in history as a massive state intelligence failure. The Palestinian Hamas militant group catching Israel both completely by surprise and also deeply unprepared.
This is extensive planning that would have to take place over the course of many months. And the fact that the Israelis seem to have been blind to it is something that is going to, I think, lead to an overhaul of the Israeli intelligence service leadership.
Washington apparently also in the dark. One senior U.S. military official telling NBC News, "We were not tracking this." U.S. officials telling NBC News that if Israel knew an attack was imminent, they didn't share it.
You're going to have to question whether or not the sources they have been doubled back against them, and whether or not Hamas was able to identify those individuals and feed false information back to Israel. But also, I think they have to wonder about why their very exquisite, sensitive technical collection systems were not able to pick up anything.
Breaching the border fence was unprecedented, seen here in Hamas video, but bursting into southern Israel was a shock to Tel Aviv.
Now, I want to pick up on a couple of themes there, because some of it was also in your Wall Street Journal article where you're talking about some of the failures there. And one of the things in there, which it stood out to me when I had read it a couple of weeks ago in a different forum, was the disinformation component of what surprised Israel, that Hamas had been talking chatter on channels they knew to be compromised. They knew that Israel was listening, and they gave them false information to make the Israelites think that, actually, they're not even looking to do anything. They want to avoid conflict, so everything's fine. What if you could talk a little bit about how that played into it, and then maybe even just the larger reason why you think the Israel was taken so much by surprise on October 7th?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the whole disinformation world is something we need to be looking at very, very carefully. The Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are using to great effect. They're in our system. They're putting out false information. They're trying to mold opinion. They're doing a great job in trying to change the narrative about what happened on October 7th. In other words, Hamas is the victim, right? Well, when you just showed the clip you just ran, that clearly isn't the case. But I think on our side, we're not really in the propaganda business so much. We're not, in the Cold War we were, but it was never, we actually tried to pump truth because we were trying to sell our own product, which we thought was a good product. So, but in the intelligence business, I think this was a really brilliant stroke on their part to try and lull the Israelis into a sense of security that was false. But let me stop there. You just played a clip about the Israelis missed it, but they're not alone, right? The entire Western world missed it. I mean, everybody's got tremendous investments in intelligence to cover the world. So where was our technology? Where were our sources? So I think there's an examination of conscience. The Israelis are going to do it. It's their country. They know they failed. They said they failed, and they're going to take immediate action. But how much do you
think, because I've heard that there was a failure of the U.S., but how much should the U.S. be monitoring, whether it's Israel or half a dozen other places or a dozen other places around the world? How far is our capacity to monitor things closer, and what could we have done differently to help Israel here?
So when I first joined the agency as a young man, I had a chief who I have great respect for and like to think I learned a lot at his knee. Tradecraft is a word they use in the spy business because it means, you learn things in the classroom, but you've got a journeyman showing you how to do the real stuff. But I remember him early on saying, Jack, the CIA has to plant its flag in every country. The world is too volatile at any time. You have to have presence everywhere. How big that presence is and what they're doing is a different story. You need to have the pulse on every country. If you're going to be the major power and your interests are involved so broadly around the world. And my point is, let me come back to the Russia, China. It can't be just China. You have to cover all the different places where there can be, a dust up where there's U.S. interest. So, and this is a very complicated problem because of technology, how you place spies around the world. And that's a different subject for a rainy day. But one of the big problems, and I want to stress this, which I did in the op-ed. My op-ed was a love letter to the CIA saying, look, yeah, the Israelis got some things wrong, but we need to evaluate what we're doing. And what I said is, I'm not just a person who served in CIA. I've actually made myself a student of it from the time. I really spend time studying it. Some percentage of the CIA people do that. Some it's a job and so on. But when I went back and looked at intelligence failures from an analytical point of view in the past, what I found is they're almost always rooted in conventional wisdom. This will never happen because, right? And when I was in Chile on my first assignment, I received the first report that they were going to overthrow Allende 3 days ahead of time. I sent it to Washington. Fortunately, I sent it as a flash message. So that it wasn't read and filtered. It went right into the White House. But the analysts at CIA refused to disseminate it because they said it was a democracy for 150 years. We hear coup rumors, but it's never going to happen. So I think what happened over and over again when I find intelligence failures is because we lull ourselves into wanting the world to be a particular way. And I think the Israelis fell into the trap, but so did we. And we fell in the trap in the sense that.
Well, now I want to go down that hole a bit because I think that there's two things that play together here. Is one is it can't be that way because this is how it is. This is the way it works, and their over-reliance potentially on technology, and because the Israel side had all kinds of intelligence sensors, cameras, human intelligence, signals intelligence, the whole thing. And, they had this stuff set up for years and thought they had a pretty good idea of what Hamas was even capable of. But yet they were shocked when you had the large scale incursion that happened on that day. And I'm wondering how much had to do with the combination of over-reliance on the technical part and, well, it's just conventional wisdom. They just would never do this.
So it's a really good question. And the two are extremely closely related. First of all, I'm a technology guy. I think you want to press the limits, everything that's coming down the road that looks like it's an advance, give it a shot, push it as hard as you can. I believe in AI. I believe it's a highly valuable thing, but it has a downside. And what I would say is most intelligence failures are tied to conventional wisdom, just as you described and I described. But what is AI? It's conventional wisdom, right? It's going into the system. I use it. I believe in it, okay? But I can't live and die by it. What is it? It accumulates all the information at a high level, integrates it, and tries to get best judgment. But it's giving you conventional wisdom. It's not any original thinking. It's not looking for weaknesses. It's not character flaws. It's say, by the way, there's a 2% chance over here. Well, so there is an over-reliance. But that's different than spending too much. I'm saying we should be doing it. Yeah. But what was missing? The bottom line in my point, in my message to CIA, over the years, despite every politician, every director of CIA, everybody I know, human intelligence is really important, but they don't do anything about it. They don't do anything to test the hypothesis of how well it's doing. And I think what you looked at is a classic example of underinvestment. In other words, it's not only over-reliance, but it's underinvestment in human sources. People don't like humans. It's spying. It's messy, right? you don't get immediate results, and you have to get out there and recruit people. So human intelligence, everybody thinks it's so valuable, but they don't invest. And I put in the article two things. I said all these people operating, not the support people, not people in liaison, targeting analysts, people out there supposed to be running human sources. If you took all of the CIA, all the US government, all NATO, and all Israel, you couldn't staff an aircraft carrier. In other words, that's the entire world, Western world commitment is under 5,000 people. How much money is paid to spies, the people that actually go out and spy? And I said, well, in the op-ed, I said, the salaries of the two teams that play in the Super Bowl, right? And that's, if you average it out, 150 million a team, say $300 million. That's the entire investment in spies. And you say, well, wait a minute, what's an F-15 or F-35 or a tank? I mean, what's that aircraft carrier cost? Billions, right?
A couple of billion, I think.
What you're talking about it is, and I will tell you, the numbers are fairly constant. In other words, we go back to the beginning of the agency, the dollar amount changes, but
the relative amount,
So if you're a businessman, you sit back and say, well, I've got this business, and I really believe in this product, but I'm going to invest 0.5% in the business. So I think this is a failure. One source out of the 200 people that absolutely bare minimum had to know something big was coming down, right?
Right. And, and on that point, because I think that gets to something else that you had in your op-ed there was a number of reports that I saw, especially in the first few days and even hours after the attack happened on 7 October, was that there were many people who did say something was going on, who did have reports going up, but that it wasn't listened to or it wasn't believed by the policymakers. And so the question is, which you also mentioned in here, sometimes the political people who get these reports don't actually take the right action on them. And if you tell us a little bit about how that happens, and then also what's the solution to it?
Well, let me give you my take on that. Right? There wasn't a human source. There wasn't a human source that reported it. No one's saying they had a human source that reported it, right? And when you look at our failures on this, what they're saying, and this happened on 9/11, there was no human report that said there was going to be an attack on 9/11 and it was going to be led by a group of Saudis and fly planes in the tower. What people were saying is, you're underestimating Hamas. It could be a problem out there, right? But if you're a politician or a political leader, you say, well, when is it going to happen? What does it look like? Well, we don't know that. So you say, well, thank you for that briefing. So I think there's a little CYA in the presentation. I mean, what I didn't see, maybe you saw something different, Dan. I saw nothing that said we had a source. And I was surprised, not that CIA didn't have a source, because I think we outsourced it to the Israelis. Said, well, you do a really good job. Why don't you do it? We don't have to do it. We'll help you with technology or whatever. And I think the Israelis, I'm disappointed. I'm really surprised that they did something that would not be in my normal expectation. My conventional wisdom said they surely had sources plugged in. That did not look like the case. I saw nothing to indicate that they missed it. This is one of the big examinations, and it's not for us to gawk at what they're doing. We need to look at what they did, because I suspect that some of the symptoms and some of the causality we probably share, and we need to take a look. Let me give you one example right this minute. Right afterwards, the question was, were the Iranians involved? You know what the official answer was? We do not have
any direct evidence.
We do not have evidence as yet. Right now, you say, well, that's interesting. And then as a human spy master, you say, that means you didn't have a source. Now, that wasn't, you didn't have a source in Hamas. You didn't have a source in Iran that could answer that question. And I think, I hammer away at the 2016 election. You don't want to get into politics. I don't want to get into politics. Well, what we did is we ended up with an impeachment. We had a big $32 million investigation. At the end, it said the Russians were running around spying. Oh, that's big news. And we're spying everywhere. But what it couldn't answer is, what were they up to? Was there collusion? Wasn't there? What was there? If we had a source, we should have said, source, well, let me tell you what we did, right? And because we didn't answer that, it remains a dilemma. And I have to ask myself, I'm sure we have very good sources, probably, but you can't prove it by me. You can't prove it by our responses to key questions.
So if you were advising the Israeli government and knowing all the things you know now and some of the things you suggested, what would they need to do to change to fill in some of these gaps and to get rid of some of the vulnerabilities, especially? And we'll be talking on this just a second. In fact, in terms of what they're going into next, because there's still lots of unknowns and still a great need for intelligence as they continue going through Gaza even.
I would say go back to basics, go back to something you were really good at, and that's human sources. Get human sources inside the Hamas, get human sources even around the periphery will tell you that something big is coming. Get back, keep your technology going. And second, have an examination of the analytical process of conventional wisdom, and not looking at, if you had looked at what Hamas said, or if you look at what she says, we're going to talk about China someday. He's not saying sweet nothings to us. I mean, he's got a hard line. Putin has a really hard line. Hamas said they wanted to kill the Jews, they wanted to destroy Israel. So we stand back and say, well, they don't really mean that. I mean, there's a lot of mistakes made in history because we don't listen. So I'm saying go back to basics. Start really questioning conventional wisdom. Collect it, but question it. Go get human sources. But let me tell you, it's not just the Israelis. You're in the intelligence business, even in the private sector. You have all this, protecting yourself against cyber attacks. It'd be really good if you had a couple of human sources that could tell you, by the way, my company's attacking you. So anyway, I would. Listen,
before we let you go, there's one other thing, especially with your track record that you had there in Russia and some of these other areas, especially. Then probably the most vulnerable part and the biggest risk we have of this war expanding is potentially Hezbollah coming in from the north. Now, they've been making lots of noises and lots of claims or whatever, and so far it's just been basically little tit for tat shots around the border area. What will you be looking for to give you any warnings or indications that they might be planning something more? And have you seen anything of that so far?
Well, my understanding is that the Israelis were light on Hamas, but they're covering the West Bank and the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that's my assumption. They have better sources. They are now on alert. They're not going to be fooled by conventional wisdom. They're going to have every source that they can get working full time on it. When you look at if Hezbollah tries it, they're going to find that they're going to get their clock cleaned in the process. But they pay that price to gain world support for their position, which is really, repugnant when you think about you allow thousands and thousands and thousands of people to die so that you make a political move. So, I strongly support the Israelis' response. I support it against Hezbollah. They have to come out of this victorious so that they can be magnanimous in that victoriousness and find a more permanent solution. You cannot do that from weakness. So if Hezbollah does it, they're going to respond in full. What we have to be careful of is the accident that rubs up against the U.S.
Yes.
That an aircraft gets shot down, the ship gets taken out. The Hezbollah, in whatever foolish moment of life would you say, well, never can happen, attacks a U.S. platform. And what's our response? And what if we did know that the Iranians were behind it? That requires, so that's what I worry about, not so much whether the Israelis can manage Hezbollah. They're going to pay a price. They're paying a price now. I mean, that's the only way you can do this. But if an accident happens, then
right, then it's a whole different ballgame. That's one of the reasons why we talk so much on this channel about we need to do everything we can to avoid this thing escalating even beyond the Gaza Strip, because everybody has an incentive to keep it contained there and not to spread out in intelligence is one of the crucial things we have to help do that. Well, Jack, we are so grateful for having you on today. And like I said, we definitely want to have you back to focus on the Chinese issues there and what things we need to watch out for. So we appreciate you coming on. Look forward to having you back.
Well, thank you, Dan. It was a good discussion and very good questions, thought-provoking. So I hope I contributed something.
We did, and we appreciate it. And we're going to continue to bring you this kind of information here on Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and we're going to give you the knowledge that you need to be able to make sense out of your world. Because ultimately, we are all in this together, and we're going to continue doing it right with you. That's all we got for Deep Dive today. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.